All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me this morning. We are going to get started on our free webinar session with ActSafe today. We are going to be talking about demystifying our safety data sheets. So with our WHMIS, our Workplace Hazardous Material Information System. So it's 11 o'clock. We're going to get started. Hopefully, we'll probably take about 45 minutes to get through the presentation. And then at the end, we'll do some question and answers. So hopefully we've got lots of you with us today, and we are just going to get right on started. My name's Kaylee Hoot. I'll be your presenter today, and yeah, I'll introduce myself a little bit more as we go. Okay, so we are going to set some intentions for our webinar today. We want to create a safe space for a learning exchange. We also want to support each other in solidarity, so we welcome any questions at the end of the workshop. And we will also leave time, like I said, during, the last 15 minutes at the end, we will do some question and answers. So this is our Indigenous Territory Acknowledgement. So ActSafe Safety Association would like to acknowledge and honor that our workplaces, classrooms are located on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Chitolo, Hilkamemum, Tsleil-Waututh, Musqueam, and the WHMIS peoples. A few housekeeping things before we get started. Like I said, this is going to be about a 60-minute webinar. The last 15 minutes will be for question and answers. All participants will be muted as we go through. The chat function is open for questions. You will not be able to see everyone else's questions as we go through, so there won't be any open chatting, but at the end, I'll do my best to get to all the questions that you ask as we go through. So feel free, if you have a question in the middle of the webinar, type it in there, and at the end, I will make sure to go through all the way back up to the top and answer as many questions as I can as we go. The recording of the webinar will be available on the website, and then everyone that signed up will be emailed a link within a week or so. And like we have closed captioning functions is available for this webinar if you need it. So you can click on your settings, accessibility under closed captionings, then click the checkbox there to enable it. And if you have any issues or technical problems, please advise our team in the chat room. Someone will be monitoring that. Okay, a little about me. I am Kaylee Hoot. I am an ActSafe safety advisor. I'm also a Canadian registered safety technician. I have an advanced safety management diploma from BCIT, and I've been working as an occupational health and safety specialist in the film and television industry for about 5 years. I've worked with a few different studios like Apple, Legendary, E1, CBC here in Vancouver, and 20th Century Fox. And I just recently was in Toronto where I got my level 3 crowd management certification. So that was exciting as well. Okay, a little bit about ActSafe. So ActSafe Safety Association is a not-for-profit health and safety association supported by the British Columbia's, or supporting, sorry, the British Columbia arts and entertainment industries. Our vision here with ActSafe is that British Columbia will be the safest and healthiest arts and entertainment workplace in the whole world. So that's supported by our core values of safety, education, accessibility, collaboration, and then innovation. So we support those by providing webinars like this so we can get all the information out to all of our workers and supervisors within our arts and entertainment industry here. We have a few learning objectives for today. So at the end of the webinar, what we're hoping that everyone takes away is that there are some changes to our WHMIS, and then we want to talk about why that matters. We want to show everyone how we can read and use SDSs, or our safety data sheets, to focus on hazard identification, first aid, handling and storage, and then exposure controls and personal protective equipment. At the end, or sorry, as we go through, we're going to go into some real life scenarios that apply to SDSs in our industry just to make it a little bit more accessible and understand it. And then at the end, we want to chat about improving access for SDSs within our industry for workers or supervisors or whoever is going to be handling the hazardous products. So these are our discussion topics, basically going over the same things. So WHMIS updates, we'll go into the very exciting avenue of demystifying the SDSs and really what SDSs look like. We'll go over 4 key sections that are really helpful to be aware of. and then we'll go into that easy access for workers. So let's just jump right in. We're going to go into our WHMIS changes and our updates that are new coming into 2025. Okay, so let's go over the basics first. WHMIS stands for our Workplace Hazardous Material Information System, and that is that's Canada's national system for classifying and communicating information about hazardous products that we use in the workplace. So the purpose of WHMIS is quite simple. It's to make sure that everyone handling hazardous products knows three basic things: what the hazards are, how to handle it safely, and then what to do in an emergency. WHMIS itself follows a globally harmonized system, or GHS for short, which is used around the world. And so this means that the hazard symbols, the labels, the safety data sheets that we see here in Canada are standardized and then recognized internationally as well. So the same kind of labels, the skulls and the flames, the corrosive symbols that you're going to see in other countries, you're also going to see here in Canada. So the system itself is overseen by Health Canada, and then together with our federal and then provincial regulators for safety, they set up the rules for the product labels, the safety data sheets, and then worker training as well. Everyone has their role when it comes to WHMIS. So if you look at the suppliers, they create accurate labels, they create accurate safety data sheets for the products that they sell. Then the employers must make sure that the products are labeled properly, that the SDSs are accessible to the workers, and that the workers that are working with the hazardous products are trained properly. And then finally, the workers, they have to follow the safe handling instructions, the PPE that comes with the safety data sheet information, and then also know what to do if something goes wrong. They also have to know all the information that comes with the training for WHMIS. So your WHMIS, or your Workplace Hazardous Material Information System, is applied to all hazardous products that you will use in any Canadian workplace. So at its core, WHMIS is just a communication system. It gives everyone the information they need to recognize hazards, protect themselves, and then protect others when you're at work. Okay, so why does it matter for workers? So a quick reminder on training: WHMIS is mandatory. So the training is mandatory under our federal and provincial laws, but there is no official certification mandate. So the goal here is competence, not credentials. So you'll see that employers make sure that workers are trained before using any hazardous products, and that they understand how to apply what they've learned to the real world that they're working in. This training can be done online, it can be done in person, can be done through toolbox talks, internally, externally. But what really matters is that what the training provides is practical and then specific enough to your workplace for your workers to actually implement that. So employers need to keep record of any participation in this training in BC. Now, the approach can be quite flexible, which is why you'll see different companies offering different ways of training. Here at ActSafe, we have an online WHMIS training that's updated for the 2025 update, and we'll go over that update shortly. So workers and employers can all stay current, and it's quick, it's self-led, it's online. And so check that out at the end of this. If you haven't updated your WHMIS recently, I really encourage you to. This webinar does not count as that, so sorry. But yes, take a look at that if you need updating for your training. Okay, so let's look briefly at what changes have happened to WHMIS and how they could affect our industry. So this is just a brief overview of what we're going to talk about. There's some WHMIS changes to the names. There's some timelines we need to know about, hazardous classes, hazardous ingredients disclosures, and then some label and SDS consistency that will kind of not super affect our industry, but that we should be aware of. Okay, so our WHMIS timeline, basically we started this change in 2015, and come December 14th, which is coming up really quick, we have a full transition into this new, the new system that we'll be working from. So all the amendments that have come will be in full force December 14th. And so at that point in time, everyone needs to be compliant with all the new updates. So let's start with what is actually new. So we have the first big change is going to be our hazard classes. We now have a new physical hazard class called chemicals under pressure. which covers pressurized liquids and solids. The aerosol class has been expanded to include non-flammable aerosols, and this is a category 3 aerosol, and these are not going to be classified under gases under pressure. So some of this may be not necessary to know, but it's good information to know that there are changes coming. We have a flammable gas class that has been updated. So now it's broken into 2 subcategories. We have subcategory 1A and 1B, and this includes the new definitions for pyrophoric gases and chemically unstable gases. And these are gases that ignite spontaneously in the air at below 54 degrees Celsius. So this means that suppliers will have to reevaluate and reclassify any products that fall into these new categories or classes, so that the products that we will be consuming or using will have changes, the labels will have changed, the SDSs will have changed. So we need to revisit these SDSs and see which categories that these fall into. Okay, so we have some hazardous ingredient disclosure, and this is our second change here. From now on, all hazardous ingredients that are above their cutoff level must be listed on an SDS, even if they don't directly affect how the product is being classified. So a cutoff level, or sometimes maybe called a concentration limit, is the minimum amount of hazardous ingredients that must be present in a product before it needs to be listed on your SDS. So if the hazardous chemical is above that cutoff level, it now must be disclosed on your SDS. If it's below that level, it's going to be considered too low to pose a significant risk, and then it doesn't have to be listed. So this will result in your SDSs being a little bit longer, but at the end of the day, they'll be more transparent, which is always helpful. So we can expect to see that ingredients list, maybe not exponentially longer, but adding a few more ingredients into it, and we'll get that transparency for that product, which makes it safer for us to use at the end of the day. Lastly, we have some changes around our safety data sheets themselves. So there's now a stronger emphasis on providing really clear and detailed information within our SDSs. We'll start seeing these include specific details like color, physical state, particle characteristics, things like viscosity, vapor density, even things like odor thresholds and evaporation rates. Now, some of these are optional unless they're super useful and they're accurate to the context. Overall, it's going to be about improving the clarity without really overloading the document, hopefully. And then the last technical change that we're going to see is the labels and the SDSs have to fully match with the new regulatory version that's coming out. So this means no partial updates. The supplier has to reclassify, relabel, and rewrite SDSs to meet that 2025 format. And again, that all has to be done by December 14th. Not that they haven't had a good 7 years to do it. So you may not notice too many changes. Lots of companies will already be compliant with this new one. But as of that date, everything needs to be updated. Okay, so that kind of goes over our WHMIS and our changes. We're going to jump right into understanding what our SDSs are. So now that we understand what WHMIS is and how it helps us communicate safety hazards, the next step is learning about the tools that your WHMIS provides. So, and this, we've already talked a little bit about it, is our safety data sheets. And it's such an important tool under our WHMIS umbrella. It's essentially your instruction manual for every hazardous product that you're going to work with. So your SDS is different from your label that you see on your container. And in our industry, you should be able to find your SDSs everywhere. Anytime you have a hazardous product, your SDSs should be available to you quite close by. We're going to go over some examples of how and when we want to use our SDSs in the industry, and then specifically, we will go over what an SDS actually is first. Okay, so your SDS or your safety data sheet. I'm going to refer to it as an SDS as we go through for the rest because your safety data sheet is just a little too long. So like we said, it's your user manual for your chemicals. Every hazardous product in the workplace should have an SDS. What it tells you is what the product is, what the hazards are, and then how to use it safely. Under your WHMIS umbrella, your SDS format is very standardized, which means that every compliant SDS follows the same 16-section format and layout. So whether that product comes from a local supplier or another country, the information is going to be organized in the same way. And this makes it quite easy for you to see a new product and flip to the section that you need to find. So we use SDSs for a few very key reasons. Similar to our WHMIS, we want to identify hazards before we start work. We want to know how to store things, handle things, use things safely. And then we really want to understand what to do in an emergency. So that could be a spill, a fire, an exposure, an emergency. We want to know how to deal with this product. So I want to make it very clear that the SDS is different from the label. So the label you will see on the container, compared to that label on the container, your SDS provides a lot of detail, sometimes more than we actually need to know, but the critical details are going to be in your SDS. Also, just to note, SDSs in Canada are written in both English and French. So both have to be available in both languages. If they are not, then it's actually not compliant within Canada. And finally, if a product is classified as a hazardous product under the Hazardous Product Act, it has to have an SDS sheet available in your workplace. So that includes any products that are made on-site or mixed on-site. So if you tend to mix or make your own products on-site, you have to have an SDS available for that. Okay, so let's talk about our pictograms. These are our small little red diamond-shaped symbols that you see on your WHMIS labels and you see on your SDSs. Basically, it's just a little graphic image that tells us really quickly what type of hazard the product has. So just with a glance, it's quite bright, it's quite exciting, and you can tell if something is going to be flammable, if it's toxic, if it's corrosive. You'll see things like we can see on the screen right now, like a flame for flammables, or we have a gas cylinder for gases under pressure. There's a whole bunch of them. I'll show you a couple more on the next slide, but if you're not familiar with pictograms, we do have some resources on our website that'll take you right to the pictogram page and explain all of those to you. So not every hazardous product will have a pictogram though. So some hazard classes or categories do not require one, even though they're still considered hazardous. In those cases, you're going to see something like a signal word or a hazard statement, and we'll go over those shortly as well. Here's a few more for you. So the big takeaway here with your pictograms is they are your visual warnings. They're designed to give you really instant understanding of what type of hazard you're about to deal with before you even start reading your SDS or your label text. It kind of flashes right to you and you're like, okay, something's got to be read about this. We got to know something. All right, so for each safety data sheet, they're going to follow the same 16-section format like we just talked about. This is set out in your hazardous product regulations. All of these sections have to be there. We're not going to go over every section, but as you can see on this first half of the chart, I've highlighted some sections for workers and supervisors. So these are some sections that are really good to know. Some of the sections you may never need, but it's also really good to know what's contained in an SDS, what 16 sections are in there. So like we can see, we've highlighted handling and storage. So everyone handles and stores a product who's working with hazardous products. So it's a really good section to know about. You can see on the second half, we've highlighted just the disposal considerations. So workers, waste handlers, and supervisors can use that. You may never need to know ecological information, so the environmental effects, but environmentalists and sustainability teams do need to know that information. So it's great for them, may not be applicable to us. Okay, let's take a quick example. Have a quick look at an example. This one is used in our industry quite often. This is Hilti foam. These are 3 of the 20 pages of an SDS for this specific product. So I think this section covers 1, 3, and 12. Those are just kind of busy pages that I thought would be helpful. So this Basically, I want to let you know that reading an SDS can be challenging for anybody. It's not an easy document to read. If you're not a trained safety professional, it's really overwhelming, even for myself. So one reason that SDSs are written for so many different audiences is because we have lots of people looking at them. So occupational hygienists, sorry, safety specialists, supervisors, doctors, emergency responders. Then we also have supervisors and workers. And because of this, the information is going to be organized into sections so that each type of user can find what they need really quickly. So even with the standardized format, some of the information can be hard to interpret. So we have health hazards that are often written in general terms, and then the handling and safety instructions may not be tailored to your specific workplace. That's why it's important to know who can help you understand it. So if you have, a health and safety committee or a health and safety specialist on your team, you can call an occupational hygienist, you can call WorkSafe BC, you can call us here at ActSafe, heads of departments, supervisors. I just want to get the point across that these are not easy documents to interpret and they do not feel straightforward. So it's really okay to ask for guidance, ask for help if you're unsure, and then take a course like this so we can all, learn the benefits of knowing your SDSs. Okay, so how do we use an SDS? Before we even use a chemical, we want to know where the SDS is. That could be in a binder, that could be online. We want to be able to access it super easily. Take a moment to read it. Even if you've used this chemical before, there might be some new information, there might be changes, there might be PPE requirements that you didn't know about. Just have a look. We want to check, like we said, what protective equipment you may need. So that could be gloves, goggles, respirators. And then we want to make sure you have all of that before you start working with it. So follow any safe handling procedures or storage instructions. If we need to keep it away from heat sources or other chemicals, we need to know how to store it as well. Finally, we really want to be aware of any emergency procedures. So these can be things like first aid, spill cleanup, anything that you need to know. So do you need an eye wash station close? Do you have a spill kit if something happens? We don't want to guess. That's the scary part of working with chemicals. We do not want to guess what we need. So using an SDS, it just takes a few short minutes. If you know how to do it well, you can check it before you start. It's going to keep you safe. It's going to keep your crew safe. It's going to keep everyone around you safe. So it's just really good to be prepared. I just wanted to point out a few areas that we use SDSs in our arts and entertainment industry. I've been in the industry for a while, and I know that sometimes we don't have the SDSs available always, but I just really want to encourage everyone to try and keep these available because we use them everywhere. So you might think that they only apply to departments like paint or construction, but really almost every department uses products that do require an SDS. So let's use paint and props and construction, for example. You'll find solvents, paint, obviously, adhesives, varnishes, any products that contain chemicals we would use an SDS on. But other places like hair and makeup. So these can be things like certain kinds of hairsprays, adhesives, makeup removers, maybe airbrush materials, anything that can have flammable ingredients, irritating ingredients. You should probably have an SDS for something specific. So we can look at things like stunts and special effects. These could be fog fluids, smoke machines, pyrotechnics, other flammable liquids. Definitely products we want to have SDSs for that could cause a fire, that could be reactive, and that could cause any respiratory distress, right? And even if we look at things like location, so we have some heavy duty cleaning agents, maybe degreasers, solvents, propane, products that can be corrosive, give off fumes, and maybe need special storage, or can be mixed with other products to cause hazardous materials. Hazardous fumes. So we need to know what we're working with at all times. And the last two I want to touch on, just because, I want to cover all of our bases here, is even things like wardrobe. So fabric treatments, glues, stain removers, paints, again, solvents, they're all there. So these items, again, can be flammable, harmful if inhaled, corrosive to the skin. Lighting and electric, so working with lubricants, cleaning solvents, flame retardant sprays. These can really pose health hazards and fire hazards. So a few key things to remember. Your SDS only applies to products being used the way the manufacturer intended them to be used. So if you are using this in any different way, say you're spraying it into the air instead of brushing it onto a fabric, or say we're using it in a machine that's not compatible with maybe its intended use, that actually changes the risks entirely. Maybe not entirely, but it could definitely change the risks. And the SDS advice may not be enough to protect you. So the SDS is created for the use of the product in the scope of what the manufacturer stated. So we often see in our industry, we use products in different ways. So please be aware of the limitations that these documents do have. And if you are going to be using these in a different way, you should call the manufacturer and find out any risks that would be involved with using these products in different ways. Okay, so now that we know a little bit more about our safety data sheets, we are going to dive into some key sections that are my favorite for worker safety. Like we saw, we have an SDS that has 16 sections in total, but some of the sections are far more relevant to our industry and the jobs that we do, especially when it comes to handling products, knowing PPE, and then responding to emergencies. So as you can see on the screen, there are 4 highlighted sections. Those are the sections of the 16 that we will be covering today. Here's another way to look at it. So we're going to be focusing on the key sections to get the information that you need really quickly. So this is without getting lost in any of the unnecessary technical details. And for our purposes, we are going to focus on section 2, which is our hazard identification, section 4, our first aid, section 7, handling and storage, section 8, exposure control, and PPE. So these are the ones that I feel make the biggest difference in our day-to-day work. So let's jump into section 2. So section 2 of our safety data sheet is all about hazards that are associated with the product. So it's going to give you a quick standardized snapshot of the risk before you handle the chemical. What you'll find is your signal words. So these can be danger or warning, and they tell you at a glance how careful you're going to need to be with this product. We also have hazard statements. These are short, precise phrases that will describe the specific type of risk. And then finally, we have pictograms, which we chatted about. And these are your standardized symbols under your WHMIS, your globally harmonized system, that give you visual cues of the hazard, like we said, flammable, corrosive, health hazard, that kind of thing. So why do we use section 2? Because it's your first look at the risk. So before you touch a product, it's going to tell you what to watch out for, what precautions to take. In practice, if you use this section, it's going to help you further determine the appropriate personal protective equipment, safe handling measures, whatever additional training you may need. Maybe you need a supervisor's help on this before working with this specific chemical. Okay, so we have some industry scenarios to go through, and this will just kind of get our brain thinking about the SDS. So we have, let's say, a scenic painting team is spray painting a prop wall with spray paint, and this is the brand that we're going to be using. And they're inside of a warehouse at this time. It's the middle of winter. The crew member wheels in a space heater to keep the space warm, and then to hold in that heat, we've closed the doors, we've turned off the fans, and then the space heater gets plugged in, and it's plugged in near where the workers are spray painting. The workers are done, they go on a break, they set the spray paint can down on a nearby surface. It's right next to the heater, and they head off. What could go wrong, right? I feel like this is a pretty easy one. Everyone knows we don't put spray cans in heated areas, but let's take a look at the SDS to find out why. Okay, so this is our section 2 of our SDS for Krylon brass metallic spray paint. So what does this section tell us? First off, if we look at the bottom, we see our pictograms. So we have a flame that's extremely flammable. We have a health hazard that causes dizziness, maybe irritation. We have a compressed gas bottle. If we look at the top, we can see that there are some classifications of the product. And this is how the chemical has been categorized under WHMIS. So these are, again, flammable aerosol, gases under pressure, specific target organ toxicity. So some of these can be a little overwhelming when you read them and you're like, what does that mean? But no worries, there's a second page. So the classification words and the label itself, like we said, it can feel super, super wordy. Those are trigger words, and you will see those. They're all going to be standardized. These are kind of under that classification. And we'll jump to the next page and I'll show you what our hazard statements can be more helpful. So this is the same section, just split into two. We can see our signal words here. So we have danger is our signal word. And we use words, again, like danger or warning to quickly indicate the severity of the hazard. So warning is usually used for less severe hazards, where danger is used for more severe hazards. If there's no signal word that appears, it means it means the product classification just doesn't require one. So that's fine. Okay, so now we look at our hazard statements. These tell you exactly what the chemical can do to you or the environment. So, extremely flammable aerosol, suspected of causing cancer, may cause respiratory irritation, may cause drowsiness or dizziness. These are very specific and easy to understand. So if we go to the hazard statements, we're going to have a better understanding than if we look at the classification, I feel. And then at the bottom, we have our precautionary statement. So these are standardized phrases that give instruction for prevention, response, storage, disposal as needed. They are going to be directly linked to your hazard classification and your hazard statement. So we've had a look at section 2. Let's jump back to our example. So this product we know now is extremely flammable and may explode if heated. Okay, so in this scenario, if we had read the SDS sheet prior to that, we wouldn't have put it near a heat source, right? We also read that it can cause respiratory irritation, dizziness, drowsiness. This means that it can make your crew feel lightheaded in poorly ventilated areas. We turned off the fans, we closed the doors. So this section triggers us to look further into what we need to protect ourselves. So if you see this label or on your SDS that it says it could cause drowsiness and dizziness or respiratory irritation, we may be triggered into thinking about ventilation, about PPE. That's just a little plug for section 8, and we'll get there shortly. But by checking the SDS before we start for section 2, we would not have brought a heat source anywhere near the product, right? We would make sure that we have either adequate ventilation or proper PPE for this job. And that means everyone in the space, so not just the person working with it. So to reiterate, section 2 is what are the hazards and how do I protect myself? We're jumping into section 4. So section 4 of your SDS provides detailed guidance on what to do if someone is exposed to a chemical. It's going to cover all potential routes of exposure. So this can be inhalation, skin contact, eye contact, ingestion, anything else that would be a route of exposure. So why do we like this section? So section 4 ensures that in an emergency, workers, supervisors, first aid attendants, they have really clear and immediate instructions for responding to a chemical exposure. Having this information accessible will reduce any hesitation. It helps responders act quickly. It makes for less confusion, and then it's going to minimize any potential long-term or immediate harm to yourself or any of your coworkers that have been exposed. So what you'll find in this section is some step-by-step first aid instructions. So these are going to be really clear and immediate, such as rinsing your eyes for a certain period of time, moving the person into fresh air, removing contaminated clothing or shoes, whatever it may be. We will also see some actions to avoid. So this can be things like whether you need to induce vomiting or not induce vomiting, warnings about certain neutralizing agents or ointments for specific types of chemicals. It should let you know all those things. And then symptoms and effects. So a description of both the immediate and delayed health effects that may occur. This will help workers recognize if further care is actually needed if the exposure happens. We also have emergency priorities. So this is going to be guidance on when to call for medical help, what information you need to give to first responders. Maybe that's poison control. And then any information that first aiders need to be reminded about for protecting themselves as well. Okay, so we have another industry scenario. So during a makeup session, we have an actor and they accidentally rub their eyes with spirit gum remover that's on their finger. Immediately, their eyes start to burn, it starts to sting, they can't open them. We call for a first aid attendant. The first aid attendant immediately asks, what product is it? And someone gives them an SDS sheet. Amazing. Okay, so let's take a look at what the SDS sheet says for section 4. What the first aid attendant is going to see is that if it had gotten on the skin, we would discontinue use of the product. We would wash the skin with soap and water. We'd apply a cold compress, and then we'd contact a physician if the discomfort persists. What if we swallowed it? Okay, we would call poison control. We would not induce vomiting in this situation without medical advice, and we'd never give anything by mouth to an unconscious person. So that just gives us a little bit of detail. But we have an actor who got it in their eyes. So we would rinse thoroughly with plenty of water for 15 minutes and then consult a physician. So the difference here, what you can see with the skin problem, it says if discomfort persists, contact a physician. Whereas eye contact, regardless of whether the discomfort persists or not, it does say consult a physician. So that triggers you to be like, okay, once we've rinsed for 15 minutes, we do need to send this person to medical aid. So as we can see, it's listed all your routes of exposure and what to do if that exposure happens. It also lists any side effects. So excessive inhalation can cause dizziness. And what we do with that first aid measure is, like we said, 15 minutes rinsing in the eye. It's very specific, and then to contact a physician. So like we can see, it's very descriptive. The instructions are there. We can see that it's telling us what to do. Awesome. So let's use this in our scenario. So the first aid attendant quickly grabs the SDS. They go straight to section 4. We read that we flush the eyes for 15 minutes. Great. After flushing, the actor is advised to contact a physician for further evaluation. Perfect. We nailed it. So why section 4 really matters? So without an SDS, the attendant might not have rinsed the eye for 15 minutes. It could only be a few minutes, and that might be far too short to prevent serious damage, or maybe neglect to go get medical attention. So by following those very specific steps, in section 4, the first aid attendant has very clear step-by-step instructions how to act confidently and significantly reduce the risk of long-lasting harm to the actor's vision. So in this section, we see a lot rinse with water, right? And we may think that this is a very standard application for chemical exposure, but I want to talk about an example of why we never want to assume first aid measures. So phenol is a corrosive chemical. This is found in adhesives, resins, paint removers. If it gets in your eyes or on your skin, your first thought might be, okay, rinse it with water. But if we had looked at the SDS, it specifically advises a very different approach. So phenol penetrates the skin and eyes very, very quickly. Rinsing with water actually makes things a lot worse. So it spreads it out across the skin and makes for an increased absorption. Your SDS will tell you to use a fat-based neutralizer, so not water. You want to flush the affected area with a fat-based neutralizer. This works because the substance dissolves the phenol and then prevents it from soaking further into the tissue, right? So this is why it's really important to read section 4 before you use a product so that you do not panic, you don't do the first thing you can think of and actually make a situation a lot worse and a lot more dangerous. So before you use a product, take a look at section 4, because if you do have an exposure and it is an emergency, we want to know what to do well. Okay, section 7. This is going to be our detailed guidance on how to safely handle and store your chemicals. This section is about preventing accidents before they happen. And you will find things like your safe handling instructions. So this can be how to pour, how to transfer, how to mix. And this can be doing that while minimizing spills, splashes, unwanted reactions, unwanted mixes with other chemicals. You'll also have storage requirements. So this can be the correct temperature range, ventilation requirements, which chemicals need to be stored where, if they need to be stored apart, if they need to be stored outside. It'll let you know those kind of things. And then any precautionary measures. So anything specific that can reduce the chances of an accident in your workplace happening. And why do we like Section 7? So by following Section 7, you're going to ensure that the chemical is handled and stored according to its hazard. So this is going to reduce things like the risk of fire, the risk of reaction, spills, and then it's also going to help protect you and your coworkers as you go through. So we're going to do our industry scenario. So after wrap, the catering team stores a propane cylinder in the back of a truck. Overnight, one cylinder develops a minor leak. Propane being heavier than air, it's going to pool on the floor level. The next morning, the crew member flips the light switch on, creating a small electrical spark. If the gas concentration is high enough in this scenario, this could ignite the propane, causing a very serious fire. Very scary because we use propane a lot, right? So let's take a look at the SDS for propane for Section 7. So we can see from the SDS, we want to keep the cylinder away from heat, away from sparks, open flames, or any other ignition sources. This doesn't always mean you have to keep it away from light switches, but if there is an ignition source and you have ignition outside of the bottle, it's definitely something to think about. The key here is we want to store it in a well-ventilated area to prevent any gas buildup. So if you do have a leak and it is in an enclosed space, it will sit on the bottom. It will not disperse. We see that we want to protect the cylinder from any physical damage and then keep it away from any incompatible or combustible materials. Okay, so let's take a look at why that matters. So following that SDS guidance, we would have ensured that the propane cylinders were stored in a well-ventilated area. So stored inside of a truck for long periods of time is not a great idea. We need to keep them away from incompatible materials, like it said, and also ignition sources. We also need to protect it from damage. So this can be even checking for damage, because if we see something that's damaged, then we can pull that away from all the other ones. We can get it checked, right? So this is going to prevent anything like minor leaks from turning into a fire hazard like we saw. So our key takeaways for Section 7 is that it's going to give you really clear, practical steps for handling safely and storing safely, and then helping to prevent any accidents before they happen. So again, we want to take a look at Section 7 before we work with a product so that we know how to handle it while we're using it or when we're finished using it. Okay, last but not least, this is our Section 8, so our exposure control and our PPE. Section 8 is going to tell you how much of a chemical is safe to be in the air and what controls you need to protect yourself. We're going to look at things like exposure limits. So sometimes these are also called occupational exposure limits or threshold limit values. These are just numerical values that set the maximum airborne concentration that is allowed for a substance. In Canada, exposure limits are regulated provincially. So this is going to be listed on your SDS. It's not always going to match your local requirements, but it should. And the one we will look at will. You may never use this part of your Section 8, but I think it's a really, really helpful spot to know what it's talking about and what you're looking at. We'll also look at control measures. So this section outlines outlines the recommendations for protecting workers. So this is starting with your engineering controls, like ventilation. Then you'll do administrative controls. So this is limiting times of exposure. And then finally, and last, we will rely on PPE, and that's kind of our last line of defense, but usually the ones that we go to first, right? And then we have some protective actions. So these describe the specific actions or equipment that you want to use when working with a chemical. So this can be selecting the right respirator, the right gloves, eye protection, just based on the hazard, and then following all your safe handling procedures to reduce any exposure. It's going to directly connect the hazard to the protective measures that you want to implement. And so why do we like Section 8 so much? So it's going to help determine whether your workplace is safe and what protective measures are going to be necessary while using that product. It's going to ensure your exposure limits stay below harmful levels, and then you can use control strategies that are chosen within your SDS to effectively mitigate any hazards that you have. So let's take a look at the SDS. Oh, sorry. First, we're going to do our industry scenario. Okay, so during a set build, we have a construction crew. They're sanding a wall down. The wall is coated with a concrete mix. Within minutes, the space is filled with kind of a haze of concrete dust. We have another painter working nearby, so there's other people working in the hazy space. We do have some minimal ventilation, but it's just a man door in the corner and it's kind of open, bringing fresh air in, but not really moving it around. So let's have a look at section 8 for this SDS. So this section's a bit longer than the other ones. It can be slightly more complicated, and I don't want to lose you, but I really want to talk about how we use this section, and I'm going to explain what your exposure control section looks like. So like we said, you may never use it, but it's good to have an understanding of it. So the image that you're going to see on the screen is the maximum amount of chemical that can be present in the air without posing a health risk. In this case, with concrete, we are working with quartz, and quartz is crystalline silica, which can be very dangerous if you're breathing in very fine particles. Each row here is going to represent a different jurisdiction. And you can see where it says basis, you can see A, B, O, N, Q, C, and BC, and those are just different provinces. So we're just going to look at the bottom because that's BC. Let's have a look here. Okay, so we have in column 1 here, the component. So that's our crystalline silica. Next over, we have our CAS number, and this is just a unique identification number for that specific chemical. And for all the other nerds in the room, CAS stands for Chemical Abstract Service Number. So if you're working with a specific type of chemical, they will all have this number or a different number attached to them. So we will go to our value type. So our third row in, this is our form of exposure. And this is how the exposure is measured. In this case, we have your TWA or your time weighted average. And this is your average exposure allowed over an 8-hour standard workday. For our industry, this can also be calculated over a 12-hour workday. Doing some fun math, you will see maybe your safety team or your special effects teams using devices to measure and monitor exposures, and they will be using this TWA or time weighted average number to make sure that we are staying below these occupational limits of the number that you see in the next row. So we'll go over to number 4, and these are our control parameters or our permissible concentrations. These are your actual exposure limits in milligrams per cubic meter of air. And then we have your basis, like we talked about earlier, Ontario, British Columbia, Alberta. So if we go down to the bottom where we see BC and we go to our OEL, our occupational exposure limit, it is set at 0.025 milligrams per cubic meter of air. So there are some important things about quartz and silica. We won't go into those today, but it is a hazardous product. And we just have different regulations throughout BC. So Canada regulates exposure limits at a provincial level. So each province decides how they would like their OELs to be. And these are for a few different reasons. Some provinces are more stricter. There might be limits based on updates, research, maybe regulatory priorities. So usually in our SDSs in Section 8, you will see these separated, and that is what your basis is. So just different provincially. So find BC, find your control parameters and your permissible concentrations, and then that's what you're allowed over an 8-hour workday. So hopefully that gave us a little bit of insight into our exposure control areas of our SDSs, but we'll jump into the easier part of our Section 8. Okay, so below below your exposure limits, you're going to see your engineering measures or your control measures. And like we said, this is talking about the hierarchy of controls and how to lower the hazard or risk of the exposure. So we'll see things like adequate ventilation, that it should be sufficient to control, but, and the big but here is, if you create dust, fumes, gas, or vapors, or any other things, your safety measures need to be used to control that specific exposure. So we'll talk you through the steps This section will talk you through the steps that you need to add for your prevention measures before you are exposed. So like it said here, if you're going to create dust, you need to have exhaust ventilation or other engineering controls to keep your worker exposure level below the statutory limits. And then our PPE section. So this is our last line of defense. And again, this is all in section 8, so it's a fairly long section. If you look at the SDS for something like this concrete mix, it's going to talk about local exhaust ventilation, avoiding dry sweeping, wearing NIOSH-approved air purifying respirators if dust is present and ventilation is inadequate. We see on here your eye protection, so safety eyewear, complying with approved standards, and should be used when a risk assessment indicates that it is necessary. So it's prompting you to take more steps into seeing what else you would need to stay safe based on how you're using this product. So this is a really, really helpful section. We want to go to this section before we start working with a product to know if the way we're working with the product is going to be covered under the PPE section. Whether we need respirators, how to use this product, that kind of stuff. So section 8 for your PPE is one of my favorites. So what would happen if we didn't if we didn't read the SDS for this scenario? It's a silica dust exposure, right? So fine silica particles can reach deep into your lungs where the body just really doesn't know how to remove them. This can cause inflammation, it can cause scarring, it can cause long-term lung disease like silicosis or even things like cancer, even at a very low exposure level over a long period of time. But let's say they did follow the SDS, the crew could have avoided unnecessary exposure. So instead of muddling through, maybe they put on paper masks or like the surgical masks that wouldn't have done anything. They can work with compliant exposure limits. They can put on respirators. This way they know exactly what level of PPE they need, exactly what kind of ventilation is required, and then everyone gets to go home happy and healthy, right? Awesome. Okay, so that covers our 4 sections of our SDS. Hopefully that gave you a little bit more guidance on the sections and why we use them and why I'm so excited about them. We are going to jump into some easy access to SDSs for workers. And this is just basic things we can do and implement in our everyday work life to make this an easier process for using our SDSs. So having our SDSs available where work is actually happening is huge. We don't want them locked in an office. We don't want the binders where no one can reach them. We don't want them covered in coffee and ripped up. We want them on locations. So this might mean printing off copies, having them in spill kits, shared in a digital folder that's accessible by phone, whatever that looks like. We want quick access. So this matters a lot during things like exposures, spills, emergencies. Every second is going to count, and having those SDSs close is really, really important. We want to keep them current. So suppliers often update SDSs with new research or regulations that do come out. We want to make it a habit of checking for updates when we order products or when we're starting a new production, or maybe our product runs out and we're buying the same version, but it's just check again, why not, right? And then outdated information. So this can mean if it's outdated and we haven't updated it, we can miss lots of new hazards. Maybe there's new PPE requirements. It's just good to review your SDSs as you go. And then we want to keep crews informed. So even the best SDSs are going to be useless if you don't know how to read them. We can train people how to read them. These can be quick, refreshing toolbox talks. You can highlight key sections, maybe your first aid or your PPE, just refreshing everyone's mind as we go. We really want to encourage that safe space to ask questions before using a new chemical. So anytime you have a worker, it's that safety culture that makes people feel welcome to ask questions and walk into that situation feeling really safe and confident. And then some accessibility tips. So I love to see SDSs going digital. I think this is a great idea. This can be on shared drives, QR codes, maybe apps. Everyone can have access from their phones if they have phones. That's a part of our industry that can be tough as well. Not everyone has a smartphone that can take QR code photos. So we'll get into the hard copies after. But we also want to keep it updated. So if we are having one that's online, we want to bring in any new products that arrive. We need to upload them into that drive. We need to remove old ones. So if we've stopped using a product, remove it from the system. It avoids the confusion. We want to make sure that the link actually works. So test it out. If you have a QR code or you have a link, use it often, see if it's still attached. There's nothing worse than an emergency. You go to use the QR code and it leads you to nothing. And then you've used it so often, you don't even know where to find the hard copies of your SDSs. So that could be a scary thing. It can be great for remote or fast moving sets or locations or stages, whatever that looks like, where paper copies just aren't easy to bring around all the time. But like I said, not everybody has a smartphone. So we want to have hard copies, and I like to call them print smarts. So we want to keep hard copies accessible. We want them near where the product's being used. So if we can have a laminated copy up on the wall beside a product that we use every single day that can tell us everything we need to know about it, how awesome would that be? Have your pictogram graph handy, right? So we have it on our website. It's accessible. You can go print them all off, laminate them, and stick them up on the wall. So if someone is not familiar with a pictogram, it gives you the label, it gives you what it does. And so it's, people are learning quickly that way too. Maybe you have a binder or a clipboard of your SDSs. And we have them in high use areas. So your painting, your special effects, maybe your crafty where your first aid is so that they can get to know it. We can have tabs or color coded so certain departments can get to certain sections fast as they need it. And then my favorite is lamination. So I love to have laminated copies of certain sections of your SDS posted up around or even in a book. Because like we said, if we're flipping through pages, we get coffee stains on them, they rip out. Have laminated copies if you can of things that you use often. And then I think she said this already, replace them with the most recent version when new stock comes in. So if you get a new shipment in, grab that SDS, put it in the binder, and rip out the old one. We've got a copy of it there. 3, we want all the labels to be very clear. So matching every product to the label and to the SDS. This is the same product, the same name, the same spelling. You can do things like adding QR codes onto your hazardous products themselves. So, you tape a QR code onto the bottle. You can use your phone. You can click the QR code. It takes you to the SDS for that. That can be a little bit complicated, but I would love to see that everywhere. Keeping your labels legible. So you can put a piece of tape over it. If it's smudging, if it's peeling, these can create mix-ups. People don't know what the product is or what the hazards are. We want to make sure that the labels are really legible, so we know what product we're using and the hazards that are present. If you're moving the product into a different container, we need to make sure that the information is transferred with the product. So this also helps your new crews and your day calls to quickly confirm what they're handling. So if in our industry, we've got a lot of new people filtering through, maybe there's not enough time to train them on everything that they need to know. But if you can get across the fact that here's your SDS sheet, any product you use, please take a look at it before you use it, get familiar with it. We can prevent a lot of unnecessary exposures that way. And finally, we want to train the habit. So this includes quick toolbox talks, quick demos. You can add this into your day-to-day, add it into your schedule. Like, here's how to find your first aid section, or you can ask people like, what section are you going to find your hazardous material handling? We can rotate which department shares SDS tips during the week. This can build engagement, can build camaraderie between departments, that kind of thing. We can also use, any near misses, we can use as examples to enforce why quick SDSs and access matters. We can share stories with each other of like what went wrong, what went right, and how we can do better in the future. So that's just going to keep everyone on their toes and make sure that all of that information is fresh and relevant in their mind. And then we want to normalize checking your SDSs before you use a new or unfamiliar product. And so that's kind of the takeaway here, is to feel confident in what you don't know. So if you walk into a situation and you do not know what product you're using, have the confidence to say, I don't know what this is. I want to learn more about it before I start this work. That's all it needs to be. Then you know how to protect yourself, you know how to protect others, and you know what to do in a situation that may be unsafe. Okay, so that kind of brings us to our end. We're going to go over a quick summary here of kind of what we learned. Um, so we talked about some updates with WHMIS and why they matter. So we have some hazard classes and ingredient disclosures that take effect December 14th, 2025. So that's coming up quick here. We have some SDSs, talked about our SDSs, that it's your go-to guide. So every hazardous product has one. It outlines the hazards, safe handling, first aid procedures, and any emergency measures. We talked about my favorite 4 key SDS sections and how they can be most helpful. We talked about how access is everything. So workers need to know where they can find their SDSs and how to use them. We want to keep those SDSs up to date and accessible, whether that's hard copy, digital copy, however that works for you and your crew. And then at the very end, my favorite is safety starts with awareness. So knowing how to read your SDS, it's going to just keep everybody safe. Neat. Okay, so that's kind of the end of my my hour-long babble about SDSs and WHMIS. So we're going to go here. We can go to some questions. I'm going to give everyone a moment to ask questions if you have questions, and I will go into the chat and see if there's any that have come up. So. Okay, sorry, I'm just scrolling through. I'm going to pick a couple as we can here. Okay, yeah, so we have a good one here. So how do emergency services rely on SDSs? That's a really good question. So, um, let's just see here. Let's see what else we have. Okay. Oh, Judy, that's a great question. Okay, so how do I get WHMIS online training? So we have WHMIS online training through our through ActSafe. It's online, it's quick, it's led on your own. It's updated to the 2025 version of WHMIS. Lots of other companies do offer it, mostly online. And like I said, there's no certification mandate. So you don't necessarily have to have a certain company certify you for it. Your company can train you internally, but lots of companies just don't have time to do that. So they hire people externally. So yeah, online, in person. We do it online here at ActSafe. There's lots of other places that do in person if that's more your style. And ours is self-led. Okay, so this is a great question. So, our site is a music school. We have a maintenance closet with hazardous supplies. We also have your standard items, so Clorox, bleach, other cleaning supplies, underneath the sink in the staff lounge. Where should the SDSs be posted? This is a really good question. So there are certain products, a lot of smaller consumer products may not come with SDSs. If you have an area in your office where you do keep your cleaning supplies, even just having your binder underneath where all your cleaning supplies are would be great, right? They don't necessarily need to be posted. If it's a chemical that you and your team have worked with a million times, and you're very comfortable with the product, doesn't necessarily need to be laminated and stuck on the wall, but having a binder even underneath the sink there would be great. There's always I was speaking with my mom before I decided to do this presentation, and she was telling me that she was cleaning her bathroom with Clorox bleach, and then she decided to use some vinegar, and then she started feeling dizzy, and I was like, it's simple things like that that we don't really know when you mix two dangerous chemicals, that it can create a very, very dangerous, very, very dangerous product. So even things like normal cleaning chemicals, it's really good to know and understand the SDSs. Okay, yeah. So what are the expectations if you transfer a chemical into a different or unlabeled bottle? So that one's an interesting one. So if you pour or transfer a chemical into another container, you have to label that container with the information. But if it's for immediate use and you're going to use that whole container up while it's in your hands, and you're not going to leave it unattended, it doesn't necessarily need to be labeled. But if anyone else is going to walk up and grab that container, that can be super, super dangerous. So if you're going to transfer it into another container, it has to have an accurate label. The SDS has to be available for it. It still needs to have all the symbols, that kind of stuff. If you're going to use a new container, it has to have a whole workplace label. So this is your matching SDS, your matching product label, your safe handling precautions, anything else that's on it. Yeah. So we kind of avoid that accidental exposure, mixing, or improper disposal. So yes, say you pour a chemical into garbage can, you don't know what it is, you pour another chemical in and it creates a very hazardous product. So that can be very dangerous. For those smaller consumer products that don't come with SDSs, where's the best place to obtain information? Yeah, so that's a great question. Any products that I've ever needed to get an SDS for that don't necessarily come with one, or that they're like, yeah, smaller consumer products, you can find them online. Or you can contact the supplier directly. They will have SDSs, but I've always had luck finding them online. And you can kind of line them up, like we said, making sure the label and the name are all matching with the SDS. So anytime you're trying to get SDSs online, we just want to make sure that they're exactly the product you have. When I was looking at Hilti Foam for the example, Hilti Foam has about 5 or 6 different very similar products. And so when you're looking at a product like that and you're trying to pull the SDS off the internet, there can be some challenges just lining up the right product with the right product. That's a great question. Thank you. Sorry, I'll jump back to the question of the firefighters and the emergency teams using it. So obviously, you have your firefighters, your paramedics, maybe your hazmat teams. They all want to use this SDS to protect themselves, to protect you, to protect anything that they're going into. So when chemicals are involved, obviously they can be flammable, corrosive, toxic, reactive. And then they need to know how to safely respond. So what protective gear they need to wear, breathing apparatuses that they may need, and then any extinguishing methods. So if they need to put a fire out or if they need to clean something up, they need to know what's safe for them to do. And like we just talked about, some chemicals react dangerously with water, other chemicals, so they need to know what method of extinguishing they can do. And then also their first aid measures. So if you're exposed and they've come in, they need to know how to treat you right away. So having those SDSs just really shortens the time period that it takes to respond to something like that. We'll give us a couple minutes just in case there's any other questions or follow-up, but I will say, I'm just going to skip to this page here as we go. Can get here. Awesome. So these are our resources that I was talking about. We have our pictograms. These are all, you can find them all on our website, and we'll have links attached in our follow-up email as well. So this is a link to our pictograms. You can get the little graph. It'll show you all the exciting details. We have our fact sheet. So that's our updated 2025 fact sheet, just all the updates for WHMIS specifically, not necessarily SDS. There's a little bit of SDS in there. And then we also have our 2025 WHMIS course. The other product or the other resource that we're building right now, and it'll come out shortly, and hopefully we can link it in the email as well, is we have a respirator protection fact sheet coming out. And so that really is going to help us guide us on how to pick out the proper respirators, what protection factors we need, that kind of thing. So that'll be a very exciting one. It's not too much to do with WHMIS, but it's adjacent. So I'm very excited for that one to come out. And then this is our final page here. So this is our webinar evaluation. This is the first time we're doing this. We hope that if everyone completes the survey, you can enter for a chance to win a $25 e-gift card. So please use your phones, grab a quick photo of this, use the QR code, answer our evaluation, and then get entered to win our $25 e-gift card. The chat is still open, so if we do have any other questions, please feel free to ask your questions. If not, my information will be linked in the email as well, so you can feel free to reach out to me at any point in time if you have any questions about WHMIS or SDS or any kind of industry safety questions. I'm very happy to answer. hopefully this kind of covered all the information we were hoping to learn today. And yeah, if it didn't, like I said, again, reach out and I'm more than happy to share my knowledge and my experience here.